you to understand the relationship between mind and body so that you don't really see them as two separated entities, but two parts of one reality, very much like ice and water. So, yes, I'm going back, I'm trying to suggest to you something very important as the basis for psychotherapy or psychological health. There's something basic that you have to understand. You have to understand something about the nature of happiness itself and why it can never arise out of a state of becoming, but only out of a state of being, we've already talked about. In understanding that, you will come to realize that what you call the objective world, the objective reality, is neutral, and that it's only your reaction to it that produces psychological pain and pathology. And that when you cease to react to it totally and just are, that you will find that your inherent state of being is itself optimal happiness, optimal joy. The world as a condition is irrelevant to your natural happiness. It's irrelevant that yourself, not anything outside yourself, is the source of your totality, wholeness, which is itself happiness when you are in that state of wholeness, and only conceptualizing yourself that produces states of conflict between the good and the evil, the positive and the negative, strong and weak, worthy and worthless, and all those relative opposites that we struggle with all the time. So without an understanding of that, we have no therapy. Because without understanding what therapy is moving towards, in terms of a state of wholeness of being, which we already are, but we have divided, or seem to have divided, through conceptualization of ourselves, and therefore struggle with the opposites within that conceptualization. The adequate, inadequate, the strong, the weak, the anger, the compassion, all the relative opposites that we struggle with, is the basic source of our pathology, not the world. It is our mind that gives us pain, not the world. It's just that the mind says, well, because this one has died, I don't have certain gratification, I don't have security, I don't have whatever the ego's needs are that we talked about. We don't accept life as it truly is. Death is a part of it. Pain is a part of it. But it doesn't last. Nothing lasts. Everything is relative and transient. It's part of the nature of this world. But our reaction to it and the rejection of that reaction producing fixation is what prolongs our pain. And the element of fear involved in it, as we become fearful of the loss of this sense of self comprised out of these concepts, out of these presumptions, out of these ideas of who we are. They are presumptions. They are not who we are when you are what you are without any presumptions.
Would you go over again the part about prolonging the pain? So that's a reaction to things.
Well, if I could work the other way and have you consider what it feels like for you to be what you are when you are entirely without conceptual presumption of any kind, so that you'll understand what wholeness means. That you are presuming deficiency and then responding to your presumed deficiency through need, and then when that need gets frustrated, you have pain, and then when you reject the pain, you have fixation of that pain, and the attempt to compensate for it by achieving some kind of conceptually positive state, or some kind of experientially positive state, if it's an alcohol, drugs, whatever makes you high, sexuality, music, whatever. So, one thing I've challenged you with is the recognition that without fear there is no pain. I don't care how slight or immediate or how physical it seems to be. You may call it ache. You may call it uncomfortable, but the mind does not hold it because not being fearful of it, the mind does not try to control it, subdue it, put its will upon it and somehow alter it. It will fade, as all sensations fade, if we don't hold it. Fixation prevents the fading of pain. Because of fear.
What's fear?
Now, if I tell you something very important, I hope you will question it very deeply. That at the core of every feeling, every personal ego feeling, is fear. Every feeling. That means even your positive feelings, because the positive feelings you will find are extensions of the negative, and that all negative feelings are modifications of pain. Anger is fundamentally pain. Loneliness, anger is fundamentally fear. That's what makes it painful. If I could take any example, trace it to you, I'll show you. Anger is always, in all of its forms. Attack in all of its forms. Such as through guilt, in which you are attacking yourself. Aggression, hostility, rage, anger, whatever. Loneliness, sadness. If we have examples, I'll show you, I'll trace every one of those feelings to fear.
You're saying every personal feeling, not...
Yes, because when we talk about what is transpersonal, we're talking about being, not feeling. Quite something different. That is your being. What is personal is only what you conceptualize yourself to be, your concepts and your images of yourself. That is your personality, all that is personal about you. You build an entire life story about what is personal about you. When you were born, everything is in finite time and space, but your being is not. Your being is unconditioned. Your being absolutely is, and always has been, and always shall be. But your objectified existence and your conceptualization of it is in finite time and finite space. And that's what the ego does in building a psychological entity, a psychological body that corresponds to the physical body as a finite, separated psychological entity in the same way that the body is a finite, physical, separated entity. It is fear that produces the experience of pain, most fundamentally, and it is fear that underlies fixation and produces the continuation of that experience, and that it is your subjective contraction away from any object of knowledge that produces fear, a state of subject-object duality.
What is...
When the subjective knower contracts away from any object of its knowledge, says, no, that's not me, automatically fear arises, whether it's conscious or not.
What is fear, and what is it fear of?
Fear is fundamentally, we have to talk to you about the fundamental dread sometime of the ego. Fear is always of the demise of the ego sense of self. You may call it, in the psychological sense, call it anxiety, and in the physical sense, call it fear, or you may extrapolate it to call it panic when it is consciously continuous and without understanding. But fear is only and always the ego's presumption that it is threatened with total negation. And, or plus, the fact that the ego as subjective awareness contracts away from that conclusion. If you didn't contract away from that conclusion, there wouldn't be the painful aspect of the fear. It would just be a statement, you would acknowledge that, it would pass. By contracting away from it, it has no chance to move into conscious awareness and speak and drain out, as all feelings naturally do. It remains preserved. It remains fixed or fixated. It cannot drain itself out. It becomes like frozen static, like a wave unable to be free-flowing becomes frozen static like a piece of ice, and cannot drain itself out. as long as conscious awareness remains contracted away from its experiential objects, pretending that it is somehow cut off or dualistically separated and disowns this particular feeling, this feeling remains static, unable to flow into conscious awareness. Its message of fear, meaning threat to the ego's sense of negation, is not heard consciously, and so it endures. And so you remain pathological. And nothing you do on the surface will terminate that pathology. No matter how much pleasant feeling you pour in up here, down here there is pain. There is no depth to your well-being. It is only pleasure compared to happiness. Happiness is not pleasure. Happiness is a state of wholeness when there is no division, when your being is the natural wholeness you were from the very beginning before you conceptualize yourself. In religious terms, before you ate of the tree of knowledge of good and evil, before you start conceptualizing yourself as the relative positive or the relative negative, which we all do when we're children, in a negative sense, because all children feel basically weak and helpless and fearful and insecure and inadequate, because after all, what can they do? They feel relatively worthless. And for many of us, conceptualizing ourselves that way and finding those concepts very painful, we reject many of them, we repress them, we make them fixated, and our child lies there within us. And the rest of our life is spent attempting to compensate for that fearful, insecure, angry, hurt, whatever child in ourselves. So psychotherapy has to be a maturational process, a growth process, not just a change in behavior or thinking, which can't occur anyhow because behavior is tied to conscious thinking, which is tied to all this stuff. There is no division within the mind. But if you don't really change this, you're not going to change your conscious thinking, and the behavior is going to emanate from your conscious thinking. It's all going to be a connecting link. So psychotherapy is not just a modification of this or this. It's getting at the root cause and producing a state of maturational enhancement by the undoing of the immature fixations with which you're still identified. I am weak, I am helpless, I am vulnerable, I am unworthy, I am inadequate, I am unlovable, all the things that all little children experience at some time or other. And depending upon how insecure and hurt you are, that determines how much you actually reject and repress those feelings so that they are not overwhelming and annihilating and negating of your ego sense of self. Those negating feelings are called negative feelings, negative self-concept, negative implying that they have the capacity to negate the ego sense of self, which after all would be so terrible actually, but we're identified with it, so we think in terms of death. Therefore we have anxiety or fear. That fear underlies, because we don't deal with that. If you deal with the fear, there's no fear, there is no consequent feeling. There will be no depression, there will be no anger, there will be no, any of the other corresponding aspects of fear will not appear. All the other feelings you have are distortions, cover-ups for fear, a sense of negation of the ego.
It seems as though insecurity must underlie everything, a feeling of insecurity. Because as a child, when all of this is created, the child naturally feels insecure because it knows it can't survive without its parents.
No, actually insecure, because it's not other than fear, but insecurity is a conclusion. Try to observe it. It's a conclusion based upon the presumption that control is possible. If control is possible, you have security. Because there's no insecurity without a sensation of security possible. You can't deduce insecurity unless you presume security is possible. If there's no security possible, you don't presume insecurity is a reality. Well, how do you presume security to be possible except through an element of control over your continued survival? That's all security means. There is no such thing as security. You presume the capacity to control, for example, your parents to love you and value you, and through your controlling of them to love you and value you, you then say to yourself, because I can control them to love me and value me, I have some control over my continued survival. Therefore, I can tell myself that I feel secure. And if I can't control, I feel insecure. Otherwise, what I'm suggesting to you is you will never find the feeling of insecurity arising in a child or in an adult without the sense of control somehow being disaffirmed. Whatever it is each individual's particular means of controlling their continued survival, some of us by being good boys and good girls, some of us by being good in school, even now. Some of us, through our intellect, physical attractiveness, and so forth and so on, we feel some element of control over our continued survival, and when we affirm that sense of control, we put the label of security upon it. But there is no such control in life. I don't care what you think you are and what you think you do, you can die tomorrow. So security is an illusion, as is insecurity, because if there's no security, there's no insecurity either. And there's no vulnerability. It is all conceptual. You are suffering conceptually. The child suffers conceptually because the child believes that it should be able to control its continued survival.
It should be able to control because it needs a sense of security, or it just believes it should be able to control, period?
Well, it's only when security, of course, is not for its own sake, it's converted. I wouldn't care if I'm secure or not if I didn't think it relates to my continued survival. Mm-hmm. If my continued survival, for some reason I was convinced that I was Superboy or Superman and couldn't die, what meaning would security have? And if security didn't have any meaning, how important is it for me to control my parents to seeing me of value? None of that becomes important. Once the child learns the relationship between, I should put it another way, once survival becomes an issue for the child, then security and insecurity or control becomes an issue. The child doesn't know what to do about this uncertainty about survival. For some children, this is not a terribly important issue. The child feels loved and wanted and doesn't presume non-survival as a possibility. After all, it is innocent. It is before good and evil. It is before life and death. It doesn't presume that possibility.
But it seems like that would only occur under the most optimal of conditions.
Perhaps. Well, we can discuss those optimal conditions, but we'll be more realistic and assume that all of us experience this sense of insecurity.
That's what my question.
Yeah. But the fact that we feel insecure doesn't mean we are. Our being, you must understand, is permanent. There is no loss of that being.
I guess, but my question is, doesn't therapy at some point always have to address a feeling of insecurity, which is basic to all personal feelings?
There is a deeper feeling of fear, or what I call dread, that becomes the prototype even for this early insecurity. It's when you first contract away from your own being that there's a basic dread, a basic fear. When you become ego in the first place, however early in your life, with the beginning of your willfulness, the moment you become willful and say no, not only to parents, but to your own being, as you become a personality, a personal entity, personal psychological entity, there is a foundational dread at the gut level, a feeling of inner nothingness because it's contracting away from your real life energy. You feel incredibly hollow, empty, inwardly like a nothing. That is the prototype of all fear, insecurity, assuming it is realistic insecurity, concerned about the continued survival of yourself, is built upon that basic dread. You are already concerned about the survival of yourself from the very beginning. In the first contraction, unconsciously, it's an unconscious process. The first time the will says, no, I refuse to be this infinite, absolute being, I will be this finite psychological sense of self. The ego itself, as a contraction in the heart, sometimes you feel it as knots in the area of the center of your being. You feel like you have knots in here and you can't relax. That is the primal ego feeling at the unconscious level, upon which all the rest of the ego sense is built. That is the last ego feeling that will pass. You'll have to pass through all your realistic insecurities first, and then see there is a fundamental insecurity, and that the ego is nothing at all. The ego is nothing at all. It is presumption only. It is a contraction of the heart, psychological heart. Psychological feeling sense, the contraction of feeling there is primordial panic. We overlay that with all kinds of experience, conditioned feelings, such as insecurity, and then at a more surface level, a sense of control and a relative sense of security that hinges on your feeling lovable and valuable and worthy and good and intelligent and strong and all the other things that you have built. The fundamental point I'm trying to make is that a very deep process of psychotherapy hinges on your understanding of the totality of the ego itself, the psyche itself. If you don't understand this, your therapy is always going to be very, very superficial. And what I've shared with you itself is relatively superficial. You have to take it step by step, get into each feeling, and you'll see that fear, being the foundation of the ego itself, the ego is grounded in the experience of fear and in the experience of willfulness. That all feelings are grounded in fear. Even the positive feelings, which, like, for example, a sense of elation, which comes from affirming yourself as something secure, worthy, adequate, powerful, all the ego needs we talked about. When any ego need is gratified, then you have a sense of relative elation. But if you look beneath that, you'll find that the elation exists because we are presuming a basic feeling of fear, the ego, deflation, a nothingness that we really are. So for a moment, the balloon of the ego feels a little bit pumped up, but at some level it knows that it's got a huge leak, and it's going to leak, and the whole thing is going to crumble and crush into nothingness. The ego, if any of you have had any sensitivity to go anywhere near that level of yourself, you know you feel inwardly empty, hollow, insubstantial, like a void, like an inner nothingness. And you try to fill that inner nothingness with ideas and feelings, with whatever you can about yourself. But however you fill it, it empties faster because it is an inner emptiness. That dread is what makes most of us insane at some level or other, in terms of what the ego begins to do to compensate for all that, in terms of how dreadfully attacking we become, how hostile, how destructive, and fear always leads to that, because anger that tries to deny fear. Anger is a sense of power, which denies the impotence, the insecurity, the helplessness, the vulnerability, the nothingness of the ego, and says that if I have the capacity to be powerful and to hurt somebody, therefore this makes me presume that I exist. You will not find any anger without fear. Watch within yourself and see how often, when you are angry, irritable even, you watch and see how fearful you are, insecure about something. You cover it over with this irritability, and in some cases, clearly expressed anger. But even the irritability is anger. You don't know what to attach it to. You're just irritable. You are anger looking for an object to attach itself to. You are rubbing yourself the wrong way. You are irritating. You are irritated. Something has rubbed you the wrong way. There is no anger without fear. Give me any case of anger. I'll show you. If you explore it, you'll see. Yeah.
Case that, I believe there's fear there, but would it be okay to bring up an example here and
sure,
get a little advice?
Sure.
This just happened Thursday evening with the client that I'm working with and presenting today.
Yeah.
So I thought this might be something great to present if you could guide me along the right track. No, I'll tell you what happened. I thought it was really fascinating, but it seems to tie in so much with what you're saying. This client came in, she presented herself, as she often does, as extremely competent and smiling, and told me about her 12-year-old daughter that she'd just taken to the emergency room with a sprained ankle, and her 2-year-old son who had run away, with very controlled exterior, smiling. So we talked about that a little bit, about what that was like for her, and no feelings were coming through on her side. We talked about how perhaps her son might be feeling. And at that point, she immediately lost that exterior of confidence and competence. It crumbled. She began sobbing and, oh, I can't do everything, and I have so much, everything she's got to do. So many people are demanding so much of her, and she jumped out of her chair and ran up to me. I need a hug.
That's right.
And, well, how would you have responded to that?
To the hug or to the whole situation?
Well,
to the hug, I always respond with, I know how you feel, but that's really not my way to hug clients.
Okay, well, that's basically what I did. I put my arms up. I did not embrace her. I didn't push her away. And then we talked about that, because I remember we had problems with this woman earlier in therapy, and she stopped the hugging. So this came up, and so I took it as an opportunity to talk about it, see what was happening. She, I attempted to be extremely gentle with her and explained, how we can express caring in different ways, and how I'm not there to be her parent. I'm not there to take care of her feelings. She got very, very angry and started saying how if she can't have hugs, what was she saying? That she comes in and she pours out her feelings, and she gets very vulnerable, and there has to be love here. There has to be love, and if there are no hugs, then she doesn't know if she can continue, and she doesn't know if she can come back. She needs her hugs.
That's right. I hope you hear all that. The issue is not hug me because I want to feel necessarily loved or valuable. As you say, I feel scared. I feel scared because things are happening in my life that I can't control. My son tells this happened, this happened. And so the whole exterior of pseudo-security that comes from a sense of control falls away as soon as she reports things are happening in my life and I can't control it. So the insecurity comes. As soon as the insecurity comes, then the yearning for the hug comes. So if you were to say to her, I understand that something in you feels like you need the hug. What happens if I don't give you the hug? Can you just feel the need for the hug? How do you feel when I don't give you the hug? Because we know the hug is compensated.
Right. She said she interpreted that as rejection. And
yes, but before you even rejected her, she had a feeling that said, I want the hug in order to get rid of the feeling. I think she gave you that label by calling it vulnerability, if I heard it correctly. But vulnerability, and what is vulnerability? The vulnerability to pain and destruction of the ego. Vulnerability is really a form of insecurity. So as soon as her security is tied to control, and as soon as she recognized that things were happening in her life without her control, she got panicked. As soon as she panicked, then she wanted the hug to restore a sense of security, as though projecting onto you some kind of magical powers, that if you hug her, you restore her sense of worth, and the worth restores a sense of value, and the sense of value restores a sense of security, because that's how she controlled in the beginning. I am in control and secure if I'm valuable to my parents. Otherwise they would abandon me, and I would not survive.
It was almost as though she became a little child, at that point. And
sure.
It was almost, like what happens in all the relationships. She didn't get what she wanted her way. She immediately pulled back and felt rejected and wanted to leave, wanted to run away.
Yes.
Sort of like her children have been running away, it seems.
Right, but I think you heard it properly. It's also a sense of control in terms of getting things her way. If she can get things her way, she presumes she's back in control. So it's not just a hug or to alleviate the vulnerability, which I think it does, that's the signal, but it's more so an attempt to validate for herself that she's back in control. She can make you do for her what she wants you to do for her. And when you say no, you exaggerate the lack of control, exaggerate the vulnerability, exaggerate the insecurity. So now she must run from the whole situation and probably do something else that will produce a sense of control. And the sense of control will restore the sense of security and undo all of this. It's the child reliving this whole thing saying, when the insecurity feeling is there, it tells me I'm going to perish. Of course, we're not going to perish. But it's the child in her still screaming, vulnerability equals insecurity, meaning a prelude to my own destruction.
So what do you do with that?
Do with what? I mean, we have several things you can respond to. You can respond to the hug, you can respond to the vulnerability, you can respond to the control, you can respond to the fact that she wants to leave the office. I wouldn't let her leave the office because it's a grand opportunity. You can't run away from yourself, madam, and that's what you're trying to run away from. It's got to stop her in her tracks. Because I don't want her presuming she's running away from me, and I caused the pain, and life causes her pain. You cannot run away from yourself. What do you mean? I'm not running from myself. In the meantime, she's still standing there. So we have an opportunity to deal with the situation. Yes, you are running from yourself. You are scared. And you won't share how scared you are with me. How come? You are scared. I can hear it. The hug won't take it away. Your anger at me won't take it away. Your attempts to control whatever is not going to take it away. If we talk about how scared you are, if I don't label the scaredness, I don't have the truth of what's happening. The anger won't cover it. The fear is the essential experiential reality, unless we talk about that. We are not doing any therapy. We talk about that, and she knows that I know how scared she is, and that it's okay to be scared, and that I have a remedy for her. She'll come back and sit down and face her feeling with my help, if she wants it. not the anger, not the control, not the vulnerability, not the insecurity. If she is going to face her fearfulness, not the things she does to compensate for the fear, and all you're seeing is the compensations, the hug, the control in whatever form, the presenting of herself as being in full control of everything, and I'm in charge of everything, everything's going very well. You see how superficial that is. That's all compensation to cover the basic insecurity, which she happens to call, if I heard correctly from you, vulnerability. We have to explore with her at that level. Vulnerability to what? See the presumption? If I can't control, therefore I am vulnerable. If I am vulnerable, some terrible pain will come. A pain I can't handle. If I can't handle it, I'm annihilated. I'm overwhelmed, and therefore my ego is obliterated. Therefore death is imminent. I'm in a panic here, and you won't give me a hug. What a horrible human being you are. This is a life and death matter, and you won't hug me. Who says I'm not hugging you? I'm not hugging you physically, but I am embracing you psychologically. I'm embracing your fear. I hear it. I feel it. I know how much it scares you. We have to talk about it. You have to face it consciously. You have to share it with me. In the sharing, we become like one. Whatever two individuals share together unites them. In that state of our shared experience, creative understanding comes for both of us as to what this fear is about. If she's willing to look at it. If I deal only with the anger and the control, I'm not at the essential level. That's why I say you look at the fear, you look for the fear. The fear is always there. You may cover it with depression, which is actually covered with anger, and then you reject the anger. And you reject the anger, then you get the depression, then often you reject the depression, then you get some kind of manic behavior or something like alcohol, addictive drive, to undo the feeling of deadness that comes with the depression. Depression makes you dead, so you won't act out your anger, your rage towards yourself or towards somebody else. And then sometimes you can compensate for the manickiness or for the alcoholism for some other behavior. So distort the whole thing. See, you must understand this ego. To do a kind of therapy that presumes there is no sense of self to begin with, will always obviously be very superficial. It's trying to presume something unreal, which, and if you presume something unreal, that's pathological. It presumes that some of the behaviors are apart from cognitions, which are apart from feelings, which are apart from self-conceptualizations and identifications. And none of that is apart from each other. It's a linkage. If you take any behavior, I show you, we'll link it all the way back to what were you thinking before you behaved? What were you presuming? Let's see where that comes from. You'll see some compensation, some desire. You'll see the feeling of deficiency behind the desire, and you'll see where it comes from. Therefore, after a while, you begin to learn all the linkages. If you take any of the behaviors or the cognitions or the compensatory needs, take it from any point of view, you can immediately begin to see what the linkages are between that and between what the client is running away from, most essentially. So as long as I'm split from myself, there is a pathological effect. Until I'm no longer split from myself, but unified with what I've rejected, therefore I've undone the rejection, the repression, the fixation. Therefore I've undone the continuation of an immature, childlike level of feeling and functioning. And therefore I have grown and matured, and therefore there's a psychological healing effect. I'm now more mature psychologically than I was. I think in most cases we're functioning at too superficial a level. And we're equating a little bit of movement with therapeutic effect. The moving us perhaps from the behavior to some of the cognitions and maybe to some of the more superficial feelings, the anger perhaps. It's a little bit deeper than need to control to get that far. But not usually the fear, not usually the insecurity, not usually the vulnerability. If we get there, then we are at a more substantial level. Until the client gets there, nothing qualitatively different has taken place in the client's psyche. They may have made some changes, but they haven't grown because they haven't dealt with the basic fixation that keeps them fixated, basic rejection of certain feelings, but they haven't dealt with the fear related to that particular feeling. So for most clients, it's equated with feeling valueless or unlovable or worthless because their initial sense of security and control came from controlling the parents, so feeling valuable to the parents. If I'm valuable to them, they won't dump me. Therefore, I have some control over my continued survival. I can feel secure. So later on, they pursue a sense of worth, apparently for its own sake. They don't even know why they're pursuing a sense of worth, or value, or esteem. It's all the same thing. Not realizing it, that it's still for them connected to a sense of security. They translate being valuable to therefore having some control over people being around them and caring about them, and therefore, through that control, they have generated a sense of security. As adults, psychological adults, we deal with reality. We recognize there is no such thing as security or insecurity. You can be insecure all your life and still live to 120. Maybe not that long, but you can. And you can feel super secure and go out and still get hit by a car or still get cancer or whatever else it might be. How you feel is irrelevant to what's happening.
So the feeling of insecurity is related to my capability of fending for myself, that I have the psychological resources to be able to live a healthy life.
If that's what your sense, meaning sensation, it's not a real thing. You create a sense or sensation of security by telling yourself that if you can cope with life on your own, which is your element of control, therefore you are secure because you can deal with life through your own devices. If you're more insecure, you don't trust yourself to deal with life on your own devices, to provide your own sense of control or security. Therefore, you trust other people. You trust your parents or parent-like figures. Or you make a parent-like figure of your hubby or wife or whatever, and trust that individual to provide you with a survival. You project all kinds of different qualities onto them, and you trust them to provide you with a sense of survival that you interpret as your security. What I'm saying to you is when you become truly psychologically mature, you disrobe life of all of the presumptive ideas, concepts you put upon it. All of them. Upon yourself as a bit of life, and upon all of life. Then you'll see whether you're fearful of it or not. Then you will see how you feel. In other words, I'm saying that all of your fears, all of your psychological pathologies, is all mental, a mind game. It has nothing to do with life. We cause our own pain. That in some sense, there's no divorce between the psychological and physical pain, and that the psychological pain, painful feeling, often becomes translated into a physical sensation of pain. And so if you listen to the physical sensation of pain, you will often be able to discover the psychological painful feeling that is hidden in it. And that the physical sensation of pain will not go away until the psychological pain has been consciously heard and reduced. There's no separation between the two. I'm fundamentally trying to suggest to you that there's much more depth that has to be understood before we can be psychological therapists. It is not just a superficial system that you can apply that's going to heal anybody, because the pathology is usually too deep in most cases for most individuals. We just don't understand. And not understanding, we are the blind leading the blind. We have maybe a little more sight, a little more maturity, but we also live with conceptual clothing upon ourselves, presumptive ideas of who we are, presumptive ideas about what life is and what other people are, and we relate to life as though through a glass darkly, through those presumptive ideas, and not contacting life directly as it is. When you contact life directly as it is, without the overlay of presumptive ideas, you will feel a life energy within all living things. That life energy is absolutely ecstatic, and you will feel a state of peak experience and unconditioned, without any cause, without any reason. Just contact with life is all you need to be happy. But we don't have that contact because we are living or relating to life through this last argument of presumptive ideas about it and about ourselves that makes us filtered. We are not immediately and directly experiencing life. We are experiencing life mediated through the tree of knowledge of concepts and value judgments about it. That's really a very important statement, whether you grasp it or not. It is the truth. So as therapists, ultimately, we have learned to disrobe our real being from all of the presumptive ideas of personality that we have superimposed upon it. We are real. We are neither good nor bad. We are real, spontaneous, creative, and that energy flow from moment to moment, just being what we are and not what we think we are, or what we think we should be, or what we think we shouldn't be, or what we think we have become. But our being does not become. Our ideas of ourselves becomes. So most of us have these childlike presumptions about ourselves still fixated in the depth of our subconscious. And that keeps us feeling like children, and in some ways acting like children, even though we don't hold it to be consciously real for us. We know that it's foolish for us to feel vulnerable, but we feel vulnerable. We know it's foolish to feel insecure, but we feel insecure. We know it's foolish to feel so fearful much of the time, so angry much of the time, or whatever we feel. We know that it's not appropriate to the situation, but we feel it. And in many cases, we justify it, we rationalize it, and even indulge it, even though at some level we say, I know it's not reasonable. Based upon what I'm telling myself has produced it. The fear is never reasonable, because the fear is based upon the presumption that your ego is your real self, because it's easily threatenable, because it is not real. You are living in fear and in panic all the time, down here, trying to preserve something that cannot be preserved. And then you don't feel it as much as you will feel later on in life, because as you get older, and the ego identifies with the body as well, and the body starts deteriorating and going down the drain, and you have no control to keep yourself from pain and from dying, then you really panic. I don't care if you're a therapist or not, you will panic. What will you tell yourself? How am I going to preserve myself? I am losing it, and I can't preserve it. You're young, so you're only concerned with the preservation of your psychological ego, not the physical component of the ego. But you will feel it later on. Unless you understand and come to terms with something very profound in yourself, in terms of what is real in you and what is not. So helping you develop as a therapist is not apart from helping you understand much more deeply the basic source of pathology, from which the understanding of therapy will arise. It is not just preparing you more clearly about certain techniques. What do you do when there are silences, for example? Although we can certainly talk about those things. But I would say you have to understand the silence. In some cases, I'm silent because I'm really reflecting on what you've said, and I'm trying to feel the feeling that you are suggesting is within me. You said to me, why are you running away? Why are you controlling? What happens when you don't get the hug? And I'm listening, and I'm silent. And those circumstances, you don't mess with me. You let me have the silence. In other circumstances, I am silent because we're in a battle of wills, and I don't want to say anything. Not that there's anything going on within me. I don't want to say anything. I want to control you to ask questions. I want you to provide structure, so I won't have to examine my own spontaneity.
So what do you do in that case? You part.
Then you must deal with the silence. So you don't know what to do with the silence just per se silence. You've got to understand what is the nature of the silence.
But if you, the client, are trying to control me by your silence, by trying to get me to ask you questions,
yes.
Then if I start asking you questions about your silence, then I'm giving you exactly what you want.
You may. You may have to then tell me what you feel. We're struggling with each other, aren't we? Isn't that what we're doing? Why are we doing this? You're struggling with me. You're fighting with me. You're afraid of me. Maybe I've earned that. If I have, you need to tell me. However I have earned it, the client's eyes. The fact that I'm too strong, the fact that I'm too insightful, the fact that I will not be manipulated, the fact that they project all this upon me, whatever it may be. That silence is not a working silence. It is a resistive silence. You'll find that true in every case. There is no recipe or way of dealing with anything in therapy, because the understanding may move you in one of two directions always, in a constructive way or in a pathological way. There's no behavior. Even my anger and rage toward you can be constructive. Maybe for the first time that I can get angry with an authority figure. You may not want to interpret that right away, but encourage the anger. Tell me more about how you feel. You don't want to shut it off by making it a transference thing too early. You're seeing me like your father, aren't you? And you're getting angry. It's not really me you're angry with. That shuts the whole thing off. You're angry with me, that's okay. Tell me more about what you're angry about. What have I done? What have you heard? I mean, you hear the transference quite often, but they're playing it out, and they themselves will start to hear the relationship. Yeah, I sound just like my mother used to sound. And it sounds like I'm putting you in the position of being my father. Very interesting. They may not see that, or you may have to help them to see that. But the first thing is to encourage the anger, because they've never been able to express anger. And that's a sign of growth in therapy. They're angry toward you, and they're telling them to terminate and not come back to therapy anymore, or however they put it. In other cases, their inhibition will be a sign of growth, because they have used anger all the time to cover fear, and now they're not using anger anymore to cover fear, and they're quiet because they feel the fear. And that's a sign of growth. In other cases, they're quiet, they indicate they want to escape from what they're feeling. So there's nothing in therapy that you can say is pathognomonic of anything. It can either be a constructive thing or a pathological thing. You have to understand. There's no recipe, there's no scientific formula that says that when a client does this, it's always pathognomonic of that, whatever it may be. It may be, but it may be a sign of just the opposite. I can't think of any sign that can't be a sign of psychological growth, attempt to heal oneself, as well as it can be a sign of escape and denial. Anything to think of. That's what we want to try to learn.
So you wouldn't necessarily want them to look at the fear immediately. In the example you just used, you told us a few minutes ago that underneath the anger is really fear.
Yes.
But if you have a client who has never expressed anger, and this might be the first time they've gotten in touch with their anger and been able to express it, you would want them to go through that first.
That's right, but there are various levels of fear. In other words, if I can't assert myself, quite often there's a fear there. I won't assert myself. If I assert myself, I might get angry and lose control of the anger. So there's often a fear about my inability to get angry. But see, beneath the anger will also be a more fundamental fear. So you may actually have to start with a very surfacey fear. It's difficult for you to assert yourself. I don't want to give you all this baloney training about looking me in the eye and whatever else, speaking from the diaphragm and asserting yourself, Because we know that if a client has no fear of the consequences of asserting themselves, that they will assert themselves, because there's no serious consequence to be feared. You don't need techniques to teach people to be assertive. So, we have to say you're scared. There's some fearful consequence that if you assert yourself, you're afraid, fearful, that something will happen. The key word is fear. The fear moves you away from the anger, contracts you away from the anger, so you feel only the fear. When you feel the fear, you become inhibited, don't express yourself. So, yes, in this case, if I could get angry, I will have undone this fear and the consequences related to it. If I get angry, somebody will hurt me, somebody will reject me, somebody will abandon me, I will heighten my insecurity, I will give up my control, or whatever else is the reason why I can't let myself be assertive or aggressive or angry. You see, but then the anger will come. But as you say, there is a deeper fear within that anger. A much deeper fear within that anger. We need very specific examples, perhaps, so I can show you as we take it to whatever level the client presents it, all the various levels of fear that can exist to the fundamental level of fear. But you don't want to compensate. You understand how dangerous that is. If I teach the client assertiveness techniques, then either I'll intensify the fear as the client withdraws all the more, or the assertiveness techniques might trigger the rage and loss of control. which is ego-dystonic for the client, otherwise it wouldn't be guarded against, and we don't know what the consequence of that's going to be. So it's very careful in taking sides between two elements of a client's functioning. You mustn't assume that the conscious volitional desire to be assertive is the only element of that issue. There's also a part of her that does not want to be assertive, otherwise she would be assertive. Why side only with the conscious part that says, yes, I want to be assertive? The part that says, no, I don't want to be assertive might be more dominant, more real, because it protects the client against the client's destruction. Because the client as a child has felt all the way along the way. If I assert myself, if I get angry, I will be abandoned and I will die. I'll be rejected and I won't survive. I'll have no security. So the control of my anger is the control over my continued survival that I call security. You see? You can't tell me that I should express my anger. That you're a nice, kind person, there's no reason why I can't express my anger to you. You can only ask the truth, what happens if you were to feel angry toward me? So what would that anger want to say? Well, that would be scared. All right, I'll listen to the fear then. What does the fear say? If I get angry, you will reject me. We can go to left field and say, well, I wouldn't reject you. I'm here to accept you. Goes the wrong way. Or what makes you think I'm going to reject you? What basis do you have? That's also going the wrong way. You've got to deal with, well, what happens if I were to reject you? Because you're going in depth, not breadth. So you're looking at the compensation. It would be so terrible if I rejected you. I would be all alone. So what? You'd be all alone. What's going to happen? What's the consequence of being all alone? I wouldn't know what to do to take care of myself. I wouldn't know how to cope. It's out here in the vulnerability and the insecurity and the need for control and the belief that other people know how to cope and have to help her or him to cope. And all that goes with that.
So can we keep going? Oh, shoot.
Is it our time right?
Can you just go another 30 seconds with?
Oh, sure. That's all.
So, I believe I can't cope.
That's right. Be in that feeling of can't coping and share with me why you are convinced you can't cope. I can't cope because I'm so weak. So whatever. Why am I so weak? I was afraid to assert myself to my parents. I could never be strong vis-a-vis them. I never let myself be strong. Not being strong, I have no means of coping. I've never been able to be angry. I've never been able to contest my pain, wherever it comes from, which we'll explore and see. You are convinced of your weakness because you have been weak. You have been weak for a purpose. If you bring up the live examples, we'll be able to trace it relatively quickly. You see how fast therapy can take. It doesn't take a long time. What takes a long time is the lack of the therapist's understanding of what's happening. Truly. That's what takes a long time. The therapy needn't. It may also depend upon the client's resistiveness, and level of maturation, and commitment to growing. But I find that most clients, once you label the fear, it takes a long time with the escape and all the distractions away from the fear, but once you label the fear and the conviction that you can help them deal with that fear, then you've got a motivated client.
What do you mean when you say a long time?
I was just thinking the same question. What's a long? 2 years? 3 years?
Okay, no, much shorter.
Short?
Yeah, I think in terms of within 5 sessions. Most therapy has taken place within 5 sessions. It may sound absurd to you, but if you can catch early, at the very beginning, the basic issue, you don't have to work out all the related issues. You have to work out the basic issue, because everything else is a branch of that tree. Bring up an issue, and I'll show you how fast we can get to it, and you'll see that even within 5 sessions, it's not unreasonable. I'll show you. Okay, we'll
you're
talk
all
about
finished? You mean you're ready to terminate after 5 sessions?
Yeah. Would you believe me that on some occasions after 1 session?
I find it very hard to believe.
Sometimes it's true.
Are you going to do round today?
Jeez.
Go ahead, tell me what you want to say.
I know people who've been in therapy for 20 years.
I know they are, but they're not really in treatment.
Well, that's what I think too. But
For Woody Allen, 25 years in psychoanalysis.
yeah.
Or that.
Who died?
Yeah.